Hi, my name is Jennifer Bravo, and I am presenting my conference paper called Ink Image Interaction Exploring Multimodal Composition. There is a permeating misunderstanding about the complexity of graphic novels and their appropriateness in secondary classrooms. For high school students, they are continuously doing bite sized reading in their social media centered worlds, and graphic novels help to engage students while also providing them with important instruction in the way of visual rhetoric, multimodal composition, and diverse voices. I was just personally approved to teach Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi in my AP Language and Composition class next fall. I've been designing the unit to focus on rhetorical strategies and visual rhetoric, and I think this book will provide a rich model for these concepts. I should also note that a colleague proposed a graphic novel course as an elective at our school, and our academic principal rejected the idea of a comic book class. To me, graphic novels play a crucial role in rhetoric and composition and secondary education in general because their multimodal form develops visual and textual literacy while fostering diverse student voices and more inclusive discourse practices. Graphic novels join students in deep learning and rich conversations about human meaning making. Catherine Comer, an author that we read in class, argues in Illustrating Praxis, Comic Composition, Narrative Rhetoric, and Critical Multiliteracies that comics are a powerful tool for teaching writing and critical thinking, especially when students not only read them, but also create their own. She claims that composing comics helps students develop multiliteracy skills by combining visual and textual elements while also deepening their understanding of how meaning is constructed. So, using comics and concepts like narrative gaps, narration, vocalization, students learn how authors shape stories and influence audiences. And Comer emphasizes that graphic memoirs are particularly effective because they encourage reflection on identity and experience while showing that personal narratives are crafted and not always purely factual. Creating comics increases student engagement and strengthens rhetorical awareness, and that helps students become more active and critical readers and writers. The multimodal nature of graphic memoirs foregrounds the rhetorical choices involved in storytelling as meaning emerges through the interaction of visual design, spatial organization, and written language. When students create comics, they engage more actively with these rhetorical decisions and they develop a heightened awareness of audience, purpose, and representation. As a result, students not only become more engaged, but they cultivate literacy skills that enable them to analyze and produce complex narratives with greater intentionality. For example, a student deciding how to visually represent a memory must consider what to include, what to omit, and how to frame the scene, which mirrors the same selective process used in traditional writing. In her article in Defense of Graphic Novels, Catherine Strong Hansen conveys the sentiments from a teacher's feedback with incorporating graphic novels in her classroom, where students were initially identified as non readers and defined themselves as reluctant readers after they learned that term, and had said they'd never written anything more than 6 or 7 pages. And their final essays at the end of the project were close to 15 pages. So there's a transformative impact that graphic novels can have on students who previously saw themselves as disengaged or incapable readers and writers. They participated more after this, they wrote more. The importance of this shift lies in how it challenges the assumptions that struggling readers lack motivation or ability. Hansen's inclusion of this teacher's anecdote shows that the format and accessibility of graphic novels can speak interest, build confidence, and create a classroom community. Visual elements in graphic novels also actively support this empathy building process, which can aid in joining students of various backgrounds in classrooms that are traditionally structured by division. Kenneth Burke explains the idea of identification, finding common ground or connection between people only matters because people are fundamentally divided from one another. Because individuals are separate with different experiences, beliefs, and interests, rhetoric or any type of persuasive communication exists to bridge those gaps and create a sense of unity. If humans were not divided, if they were truly the same in every way, there would be no reason to persuade, explain, or connect because understanding would happen naturally and completely. In that ideal situation, communication would be effortless and perfect, like the way theologians imagine angels communicating instantly and fully. However, in reality, communication is always incomplete and sometimes difficult. So, identification serves as a way to compensate for that division, helping people feel connected, even though they are truly not the same. By shifting then with one of the concepts he brings up of the idea of killing to a more general concept of identification, Burke reframes rhetoric as not just about conflict or struggle or opposition, but also about connection and shared meaning. Ultimately, he argues that even forms of conflict like war, verbal disputes, etc., are derived from their deeper principle of identification. And this makes them secondary rather than fundamental to human communication. Chisholm, in mediating emotive empathy with informational text, notes that emotive empathy is key to learning history. By connecting emotionally to historical figures such as soldiers, civilians, or leaders, students begin to see history as a sense of or a series of human experiences rather than just facts or dates. Their study in an eighth grade classroom shows that students who use their own experiences, feelings, and prior knowledge to imagine what people in the past felt helps them better understand historical events. Visual elements in graphic novels actively support this empathy building process. Students in the study interpreted emotions like fear and sadness and anxiety by analyzing images, things like facial expressions, body language, the scenes of war, and then use those interpretations to shape their understanding about the historical context. And this demonstrates how visuals can guide emotional and cognitive engagement simultaneously. Furthermore, Burke's claim that people are fundamentally divided and that communication exists to bridge those gaps through identification, finding shared meaning, and despite differences, shows that graphic novels directly support this process in a few key ways because graphic novels combine visual and textual storytelling, which creates more entry points for identification. Traditional texts rely heavily on language, which can be a barrier for some students due to reading level, background knowledge, and even language proficiency. Graphic novels, however, use images and facial expressions and spatial storytelling to make emotions and experiences more immediately accessible. And this helps students from different backgrounds meet the text more easily, reducing the division Burke describes. Graphic novels can bridge gaps between students themselves. In a classroom with varied reading abilities and interests, traditional literature can sometimes deepen the divisions, especially when some students overly engage or dominate conversations and others feel excluded. Graphic novels level the field, making discussion more inclusive. When more students can participate, the classroom becomes a shared space of meaning, which is exactly what Burke sees as the goal of rhetoric. Graphic novels often represent diverse perspectives and lived experiences in a vivid and personal way. Because identification depends on recognizing shared human experiences across differences, these narratives allow students to connect with characters whose lives may be very different from their own. The visuals intensify this connection since students do not just read about a character's struggle, they see it. And that strengthens the rhetorical function Burke emphasizes, creating unity out of division. Burke also reframes rhetoric as not just about conflict, but connection and shared meaning. Graphic novels embody this by blending artistic and literary modes, showing that meaning can be constructed in multiple ways. And that encourages students to see communication itself as flexible and collaborative. And it reinforces the idea that understanding others requires multiple approaches. Connecting back to Burke, since humans are divided, we need forms of communication to maximize opportunities for identification. Graphic novels do this especially well, which makes them valuable and justified additions to high school literature courses. Opponents of adding graphic novels into the secondary curriculum often believe that graphic novels make students lazy readers who depend on pictures rather than the text to make meaning. However, what they fail to understand is that the imagery and drawings are not inherently less valuable than verbal literary art. In fact, images often convey a richness and depth of ideas that require interpretation and high level critical thinking, analysis, and evaluation skills. And this suggests that graphic novels are not a shortcut around reading, but rather a different mode of engaging with complex ideas. When reading graphic novels, students are tasked with interpreting both visual and textual elements simultaneously, and that can increase their cognitive demand. Since many school districts, like mine, are very mindful about how curriculum meets standards, it should be noted that graphic novels satisfy many of the International Reading Association and National Council of Teachers of English's joint standards for English language arts, since the first standard specifically mentions that students read a wide range of print and non-print texts. Simply, graphic novels, like other types of literature, can broaden and deepen a student's appreciation of texts and overall learning. Additionally, student engagement and learning is increased because graphic narratives challenge definitions that are traditional, surrounded by storytelling, and that meaning is only shaped through words, but also visual and structural elements. In Graphic Narratives and Graphic Theory and Introduction by Gardner and Herman, they suggest that studying graphic narratives challenges older assumptions of narratology, such as that studying graphic narratives challenges older assumptions in graphic narratology, such as the idea that a story stays the same regardless of the medium. Instead, they emphasize that the medium, the visuals, paired with the verbal elements, actually shapes how a story is told and understood, meaning theories of narrative must adapt. Comics studies have historically focused on defending the legitimacy of comics as an art form, while narrative theory has lacked attention to visual storytelling. By combining the two fields into what they call graphic narrative theory, scholars and students alike can better analyze elements like images, panel layout, and style, and how they influence meaning, interpretation, and reader experience. Graphic narratives open up new areas of inquiry, including how readers construct story worlds from words and images, how different media affect storytelling possibilities, and how narratives engage with cognition, emotion, and even non-human perspectives. Persepolis challenges traditional portrayals of girlhood as passive or helpless. Rather than depicting girls as victims and needing rescue, Satrapi represents Marjane, or her younger self, as a thinking, politically aware agent who actively interprets her world, even as she faces oppression and war. And this reframes girlhood as a complex and empowered experience, not one that's just vulnerable. The graphic memoir form with images and text is essential to how this story is told. Techniques like panel layout, repetition, and linear interaction between child and adult perspectives allow Satrapi to represent trauma, memory, and identity in ways that traditional prose cannot. This visual style helps readers see both the simplicity of childhood and the deeper political realities at the same time. In James Bucky Carter's article, Transforming English with Graphic Novels, Moving Toward Our Optimus Prime, he agrees that graphic novels are valuable tools for teaching social justice and critical thinking, and many of the texts that Carter suggests, including but not limited to Persepolis, Truth, Red, White, and Black, and Maus, explore issues of race, class, gender, war, and inequality. And texts such as these allow students to examine complex social issues and question power structures, both past and present. He cites the contact zone theory, coined by Mary Louise Pratt, as a basis for his beliefs. Graphic novels, therefore, help students meet and clash and grapple with complex social issues and their attitudes towards and beliefs about them. In the secondary classroom, graphic novels offer a bridge between familiar reading practices and more sophisticated analytical thinking. Rather than replacing traditional literature, graphic novels and graphic narratives expand the definition of traditional literacy itself, asking students to engage in critical representations of both visual and textual elements simultaneously. This dual engagement strengthens comprehension, supports diverse learners, and opens spaces for students who may not see themselves in traditional or canonical texts. Moreover, graphic novels often center marginalized voices and global perspectives, fostering empathy and encouraging more inclusive classroom approaches and discourse. Embracing graphic novels is not a compromise of standards, but a necessary evolution of them, equipping students with the interpretive tools and cultural awareness needed to participate thoughtfully in a complex and multimodal world. Thank you so much for attending my conference paper.